Hello there watchers and welcome back to ANCAL. This is episode 13 and we're going to be exploring another 30 years of events today. I hope you enjoyed the series because there's going to be a lot happening in this episode specifically. This is where we left off with Mitiaba becoming independent from Koranya, and Koranya basically lost its whole empire, sadly. And also, Socotra became independent. I don't know if I mentioned that last video. And they became independent from Uganda. The name is Matrama, and their capital is Mulu. Now, on to the events of this episode. First event, a new alliance is formed called Atlantico, or as these members would call it, Atlantico, because they're obviously Spanish, coming from Corania, whatever. This is the first time an alliance has been created. The world didn't know that alliances could exist, but now they do. The first countries to join Atlantica are Mitiaba, Ferrane, and Valvestas. Ferrane is the leader of this alliance. Does anything else happen? Yes. Right here. New Zealand in the real world becomes independent from Valvestas. Their capital is Velen, and their name here is Nova Caspia, or Nova Caspia. Now, a few more nations have joined Atlantico. First, there's Caldenau, which has joined Atlantico, and also Nova Caspia, which has also joined Atlantico. Meanwhile, on the non-alliance side, and quite literally the opposite, Madagascar becomes independent from Uganda as Manandasambi. The capital is Nandikombo. After this tiny little country Motrama joined Atlantico. Oh gee, I wonder what else happens. There's a deal, a treaty, you could say, going on here. Basically, the government of Syorsk realizes that their southern tip is surprisingly close to the Indian Ocean. So they strike a deal with their bordering countries, Mara, Fukushan, and Hanjoda. In order to make Syorsk go through to the coast, Fukushan moves its Pakistani coast further to the west and taking some of Mara's territory in the process. Hanjoda is supposed to be promised some territory from this, but unfortunately for them, there are no territory leftovers for them to take. In order to make up for this and compensate, they establish a new city called Murkapur, right next to the border with Howli. After this, another event takes place. In the late stages of 483 and the early stages of 484, Mahran says something to Kanai. Their governments are conversating. Marha says that they deserve Israel's coast because they are supposedly the originals and they deserve it because it has more history. Kanai strikes back, realizing that this is a foolish attempt to steal their capital city, Kaj, and force them into collapse. So Kanai declines them and says, "No, your argument makes zero sense. Our country is also an original nation from the olden times. There is no reason for you to take our territory simply because it has history." After this, Marha gets very angry. They forcibly take some of Kanai's territory themselves and take part of Israel's coast and also some parts of real Jordan. Kanai obviously has been hiding their weapons, just waiting for the perfect moment to finally use them. And this is the perfect moment. They immediately strike back and take far more land than Marha ever did. Then Menbasa joins in on all of this. They're tired of not doing anything, and they take Jord, the capital, and then they take their second city, Enk, so they don't have any cities anymore. Then Korania, wanting more land, joins in and takes the northern coast in Algeria. And finally, Uguana decides to take some of Marha's land from the south. This is looking very, very tough for Marha. Then, the unspeakable happens. On January 18th, 486, the nation has collapsed. The nation is no longer with us. This is the first time this has happened. Nobody knew this could happen. They thought once they created a nation, they were immortal. But alas, they are not. The news spreads across the whole world, and the whole world is in shock. Rightfully so. There is now a big plot of empty territory in the middle of Africa. Everybody thought that after ANCAL and the whole fight for Australia happened, there was no more territory left in the world to take. It just seems that this is not true. Eventually, in 487, Ferrane agrees to take the empty land. This will prove to be a slight mistake for them in the future. Meanwhile, there's also other shenanigans going on. Back in 486, a Mahran official and a Mahran wizard team up and they perform black magic on Syarosk. Syarosk's economy randomly starts failing and they fall into a recession. They have no idea why. Parts of Kiluril and Kemnabat start falling. Syarosk has an idea, but they still conjure it to make sure they don't make any mistakes like Marha. A year later, 487, Syarosk presents the idea to Henjoda. Syarosk has realized that both of them are currently suffering. Henjoda is losing tons of territory and their cities. It's not looking too well. Now Siorosk has been cast by Mahran into a recessive economy. So, they sign a deal, and in 487, they unite. The new country of XIII is created. This will certainly be a superpower, a powerhouse for the future coming. After this, something strange happens. In the later season of 487, Vilk randomly launches an outlandish attack on Mitiaba. They are very surprised by this, as Vilk isn't the type of person to do this. They don't think. And then Atlantico realizes something. Back in 485, a nation, an anonymous representative, joined Atlantico. They requested to join, and Atlantico agreed, not knowing who they were. So, when Vilk randomly attacked Mitiaba, they knew it was a good idea to test how good this new member was at combat. The others were preparing their muskets and tanks ready to fight Vilk, but when they turned around, the war had already been won. Nobody knew why. Not even Atlantico knew why. Not even Vilk knew why. They were pondering upon this. They didn't know what this could possibly have been. Why did they win so quickly? How? The masked representative reveals himself. This anonymous member that joined Atlantica is none other than XIII. This is insane. XIII, after fighting this war and winning in a landslide, says that they're going off to space for 3 years to do an expedition on the moon. They put trust in the hands of the world to handle the wars and conflicts, tiny border disputes that will happen inevitably in life. They trust that they will know what to do, and nothing wrong will happen, right? Right? Mara suddenly attacks XIII in 489, just 3 months after the XIII government leaves to space. They suddenly claim that XIII is abusing and evading the suffering that Mara endured, and Mara says that every country must suffer at one point. Mara is absolutely furious. They attack XIII, even take some territory from XIII. They manage to capture Diana, the capital of XIII. The world is very, very shocked. Varane hears about this, all of this, and joins in on the war. because, of course, they are the ones who are supposed to handle the situation and handle it quickly before this escalates into a whole world war. So they take a piece of territory from Mahra without Mahra seeing, and they would use this as an outpost to monitor Mahra. The next year, it does not get resolved. Sophia joins in on the conflict, taking Mahra's capital, Elasa, and having another piece of territory right next to Feranes. It is quite crazy, because Mahra is just getting put into pieces left and right. Meanwhile, in Australia, Henjoda is still alive somehow. It turns out in the documents where Siorosk and Henjoda got unionized, this little enclave, this little colony, was left out. So they became the independent country of Henjoda that none of the others knew about, especially not Mahra. Mahra only had 100 soldiers inside the colony, while Henjoda spent their time collecting and training their military up to someone like Sophia's military. They immediately win in a battle between the Henjodan colony and Mahran colony. Mahra is in trouble. Then, suddenly, there are activists in the new Saharan part of Feranes. They are from Marha. They say that they want their territory back. They want to be a country again. They do not want to be suppressed. Feranes is not suppressing them, but they make up lies and propaganda to make sure that they win. Pieces of Mahran territory appear like cheese in the new territory. Nobody knows why it is Mahra's and not Marha's. We will never find out. The next year, even more happens. Vilk just goes on a rampage. First, they head to Africa. They suddenly sail all of their ships and joining in the war. They head to Feranes and take a large piece of Feranes. This large piece includes Maceió, the capital. Feranes is in a state of shock, and they don't want to collapse like their neighbour Marha did. So, Mitiaba sends them emergency resources to create towns, refugee camps, like Camp Edis and Camp Nur. Then, after this, Vilk is absolutely shocked and disgusted by what they've done. They sail their ships once again, but this time to South America, and they attack the northern piece of Mitiaba. This is getting wild, folks. Absolutely wild. Mitiaba does not have the resources left to remove this colony, because they have spent it all on saving Feranes from total collapse. This is not looking good. Vilk, in the later part of the year, suddenly attacks northern Henjoda. It appears very obviously that Vilk has been supporting Mahra the whole time. And Vilk takes a massive piece from Shiojoda. Nobody knows how they got this. Nobody knows at all. Meanwhile, on the good side, Shiojoda manages to take their capital back and also all of the territories that Mahran took. They even managed to march through Fusan into Mahran territory and take this absolutely massive chunk of Mahran. This is still wild. There's a lot, and I mean a lot, going on here. This war is very, very chaotic. Then, another year passes. Everything's going wild at this point. Mahran discovers that in 491, Mahran just randomly took a giant piece of Kanai's territory. Because Mahran realised that if there's no government, there's no military that's being commanded. No military, no protection. So they take this massive chunk and are ready to finally end Kanai and bring their empire back once again. But then, after all of this, Mahran makes it a disaster for Mahran once again. They take over this territory that Mahran took and keep it in captivity for the later years when this war is over and everything gets restored, hopefully. Then they realise, in March 20th of 491, a Iranian journalist discovers a document within the files of the space expedition. This file reveals that the Canadian government is not going to come back until May 23rd of 492. There is still a whole 5 more months of this fighting until Kanai can even begin to bring all of this back to peacefulness. And we are 23 minutes into the video. There has only been 12 years. So, it gets even more wild. Mombasa is still tired of not doing anything. They are starting to go on a rampage. As seen here, they take a chunk of Mahran territory as a camp to stop Mahran from creating any more chaos. Meanwhile, Motrama sees the opportunity here and they take a bunch of Mahran's land from the south. Well, it isn't much, but it's much more than what they originally had. This is essentially victory for Motrama. It's getting insane. Because in Shiojoda, the Vilk force gets pushed all the way back in Shiojoda in the north, and Vilk doesn't know what they can do. This is even more apparent when Mahran put another piece of their territory in Vilk in Florida and the East Coast, and Vilk can simply just not fight it. They do not have the military because they are suffering so much in this war, and they've all wasted it on the sailing in Africa and South America. It's just going to have to stay there for now. Meanwhile, Hawali also sees the opportunity here and they attack. They mention that they suffered centuries of slavery under Henjoda's rule. This did not happen, but they still do it anyway to gain more territories. Yet again, like cheese, small pieces of Howley territory appear in Sejoda. It is happening. The war is happening. There is so much going on. This is what the world looked like before all of this, before the war. It's just insane. The war will finally come to an end, as seen in 493. Finally, everything is over. Everything has been completed as Kanai comes back from the space expedition. This is wild, they say. We cannot believe that you all do this to yourselves. This cannibalism. It is clear that you all cannot be trusted to hold peace. Reconcile. And after this, everybody follows. They know that Kanai is simply too large and too overpowering to not be listened to. And as soon as they come back, they start cleaning up. They take back their territory from Mara, and Minbasa gifts them the military base. And Kanai is faced with a situation. What do they do with this territory? Mara will want to take it, but Mara getting it? Bad idea. They clearly cannot be trusted to have more land. They will simply take over the world and make everyone else suffer. Sejoda, it's better, but still can't be done. There is a whole country, aka Focustan, separating them, and this enclave will just become very sufferable, and they will lose resources because they are separated and have to go through Focustan first. So, the decision is made. Bad Jalku is officially back from the dead. And that's all that happens in the war. Now it's time for the Restoration Era. Savofia retreats from their camp in Mara later. However, there is still a tiny piece of territory left in Mara that is still owned by Savofia. Meanwhile, the Faranian territory that was owned also becomes a part of Barjalku. There's still a tiny piece of Sejodan territory within Barjalku and some Mahran territories as well, but that will be sorted out later. Now it comes to save the others. Knai sees all of these tiny pieces like cheese of Howley territory within Sejoda. They decide not to remove part of Howley's land, but rather to convert it into a more fashionable panhandle. For Howley does deserve a reward, as it despite it not seeming like that, Howley is still very angry from this, and they need a little something to calm them down before they go on a rampage once again. And after this, all of the fault lines and trenches are removed from Chijoda, and Chijoda is restored to normal. Meanwhile, in Africa, these Farane enclaves of Mara are completely removed. There's no coming back, Marha. You died. But yet, the Vilkis territory still remains. And the Vilkis territory in South America still remains once again. Meanwhile, the first non-war thing happens since 488. A new country becomes independent from Valdrestat. It is Tasmania, and the name of this country is Maunawangi. Their capital is Vilamanga. Then, 495, the final year of the Restoration era occurs. Kanai does a referendum to make sure that all of these territories from the war are happy with how they are. Surprisingly, all three colonies decide that they want to become independent. The Mitiaban and Faranian territories in North America unite and become their own country called Karostia. This Vilkis territory in Africa and Farane also becomes its own country, but they split into two pieces to make sure Masio was in Faranian hands. This country is called Marugu. Finally, in South America, the Vilkis colony becomes independent. Their name is New Vilk. The capital of Marugu is Osulu. The capital of New Vilk is Unir. And the capital of Karostia is Pitch Beach. Finally, everything has been restored. Then, maps of the New World are published, and people realize something. When did this happen? So they look back in the archives and find out that all the way back in 478, another land exchange happened that was not visible to the naked eyes. And yeah, so they reinstate it as these new territories and make sure that it stays noticed. And in 496, after all of this, Barj al-Kul gets to work. They take a piece of Mahran territory, they take Gadashi, and it becomes Barj al-Kul's third city. The capital is Qumri, and the second one is Basaba. Not the second city, it's not the capital, but whatever. And also in 496, XIII experiences mitosis. This country arrives and becomes independent. They are called Gyeongju. The capital is Yeong. They take South Korea, part of North Korea, part of China, Japan, and part of Russia. Then, in 497, things start to slow down a bit. The only land thing that occurs this year is that Yeojoda finally becomes the second country to adopt the provincial system, because they realize that their country is very big. They don't want to be split up like Yeojoda was back in the old days earlier. So they create these territories to give them their own sense of autonomy so they don't break apart. Then, after this part of Ferrane in the Sahara becomes independent. Their name is Sarehi, and the capital is Ahusane. There's 36 minutes that have happened in this video. This is a quite eventful video, isn't it? Then, suddenly, North American Filk, all of it becomes independent as Pancanera. The capital is Port Pierre. Filk is just kind of suffering in this age. After this, in 500, a new century has been reached. The 6th century, which begins with 500. In this year, Slovakia gains the provincial system, just like Yeojoda did. They join Atlantico, and a new country appears from Mitiaba. This country is called Minos. The capital is Corinna. By the way, in the 480s decade, the members of Atlantico signed a law, an oath, in fact, of which any country and any province, any territory that wanted to become independent in a member of Atlantico immediately became independent, and they didn't have to be suppressed, they didn't have to fight any wars. It just happened if they wanted to. And this is why Minos became independent so quickly. And they didn't have to go through a whole system and a whole war or nothing. Now, in 501, things start to slow down again. Because in 501 AF, yes, AF is the system, the calendar thing, kind of like AD stands for Agios Framos. In 501 AF, Kanai discovers a new chemical. This chemical is named borine. Studies show that borine starts becoming released into the environment by people after a country has had 300 consecutive years of geopolitical stagnation, meaning that if if the country's done nothing for 300 years, the people start to go berserk. So seeing this, Kanai strikes a deal with Khwazistan. Khwazistan gets this little piece of Caspia just to reset this ticker of Boreen, this bomb of Boreen. Because, if you remember, Khwazistan was created all the way back in 150 AF. That was 351 years ago. So, all this is done is prevented Khwazistan from going crazy and invoking war on everyone. Then, in 502 AF, another study reveals that it takes 13 years just for Boreen to even start decaying its chemical bonds. This is wild, because it means that Khwazistan is still going to be going crazy for a whole 13 more years. Meanwhile, Khwazistan reports that 9% of its population are in rehabilitation centres. Mordheit, they report that a whole 21% of their population is in rehabilitation centres. Because, as you guys remember, Mordheit was created all the way back in 144 AF, even earlier than Khwazistan. It's been a while for them. This country was created before the labels were even there, and they haven't done anything since they were created. So now here's a little time lapse, because I have to scroll all the way back to the present. And yeah, so in the 500s, the early 500s, Mordheit is given a deal by Isa and Basa. They get to take this little piece of Isa and Basa just so they don't go insane. However, as we already know, it takes 13 years for Boreen to even start decaying its chemical bonds, so they'll still be insane for an extra 13 years until 515. And it starts going insane for Mordheit and Khwazistan, because they realise what's happened. But also, in 502 AF, they discover that it takes 7 years for Boreen to fully decay its chemical bonds. Meaning that when a country finally has some geopolitical activity, they will still be insane for another 20 years. So, Kawana, you may remember, they are this old Norwegian country that were created all the way back in 255 AF. Meaning that right now they would have been doing nothing for about 248 years. So wild. So they immediately get to work, and they strike a deal with Vilk, asking if they can take this piece of Denmark and Germany. But Vilk refuses the deal. This doesn't usually happen, does it? So, Kawana has no choice but to forcibly take this territory themselves. And Vilk just goes absolutely wild on this. They immediately start war on Kawana. And they use all 100% of their military fighting Kawana, this tiny little country. And they take all of this back. They even take a large piece of Kawana, so Kawana is even smaller than it already was before this all started. But Kanai sees what is happening, and they join in on Kawana's side. Then Kawana inevitably wins a year later by a landslide. They take all of this back. They even take extra bits of Germany and extra bits of Sweden that wasn't even included in the deal. The problem with Vilk is that they used 100% of their military to invoke war on Kawana, so they didn't even notice that when Kawana took Denmark and parts of Germany, this part of Scandinavian Vilk was completely cut off from the rest of Vilk, and they had no resources, so they started rebelling in this part, started going crazy. And then they were connected again for just a few moments. But then, when Kawana cut them off again, they started shooting their muskets everywhere. And then Vilk just couldn't handle them. And a year later, boom, Klicksborg is born. A new country is created, basically Scandinavia. Almost. The capital is Oderborg, the old Vilkese city. Immediately after this, both Kawana and Klicksborg join Atlantica, and they even start their own alliance called Skanda. Somehow, Klicksborg just immediately forgives Kawana, and both of them start to have a lifelong despising for Vilk. After this, things start to become uneventful, really, because only one event happened in 507. This tiny country, which you may remember from the last episode, is Millennial. They join Skanda. But meanwhile, on the maintenance side, I've been doing some stuff. A new system of showing alliances is created, showing a small square of the alliance's preferred colour, instead of these long, windy arrows that are everywhere. So it's a lot cleaner now. And the new alliances roster is right here. There's a lot of ocean being taken up by all of these lists. And the only thing that happens after this is Gautwe tries to protect the tiny piece of Tibet that they have right over here. But then they somehow discover that there has been a snowstorm in Espetsu for 1 month, 2 weeks, and a whole day. That is 45 whole entire days of non-stop snowstorm across the country of Espetsu. They completely give up trying to guard this piece and just let Espetsu take it. Espetsu accepts. The government of Espetsu has a smile on their faces. For Phase 1 of Operation Mountainfish has been completed. Then, the next year, in 509 AF, Hawali and Espetsu sign a deal, and Espetsu gets some land from the northern part of Hawali. Then, after this, XIII grants Espetsu access to the Hainan Peninsula. For those of you wondering, what do you mean the Hainan Peninsula? Well, all the way back in 270 AF, when Henjoza took over Hainan, the island of Hainan, then there was some tectonic activity which suddenly pushed Hainan and the mainland together. And this carried on to XIII, as you can see here. So, Espetsu gets this piece of the Hainan Peninsula, and all is successful. In this year, Phase 2 of the Mountain Fish operation is complete, but in this year, the final phase, Phase 3 of Operation Mountain Fish, is complete. They are finally no longer landlocked. And that is episode 13 of ANCAL, aka A New Civilization and Law. Stay tuned, and I'll see you in the next episode. Goodbye, Jonker Plonkers.